Hello everyone, my name is Alex. I'm a 2000 rated over-the-board chess player, and in this series we're trying to climb to 2200 rapid ELO while explaining my thought process as best as I can for your education and entertainment. And we only need one ELO point, obviously, so if we win this game, we have made it. And my opponent plays knight c6, going into one of the really fun lines of the Mengarini Sicilian after pawn to b4. I've been having a lot of these A3 Mengarini Sicilian games recently because, I mean, to be honest, above the 1800 level, the Sicilian is probably the most popular choice against pawn to e4. And the Mengarini looks like a very strange sort of gambit. If you're a regular viewer of the channel, you'll be very familiar with this. If not, you might be confused. But the point is, if knight takes b4, we have pawn c3, knight c6 and pawn d4. And I think we had a game in the last episode, actually, of the series where we won in about 10 moves after knight b4, c3, knight c6, d4. So it is very, very powerful. But my opponent goes e5, which is a bit of a different way of approaching the position. And he's basically saying, okay, no d4 for you, ever, really. And also, b4 is weak. So what are you going to do about it? Some of you might be tempted to play pawn c3, guarding the b4 pawn. But I mean, it's a bit of a strange move, pawn c3. We need to be developing the pieces. And also, we have a far more natural move of pawn b5, I think. Just hitting the knight and kind of forcing it over to the d4 square. I think we have actually had, in a previous episode of the speedrun, pawn e6, was it? It was something like pawn e6, pawn b5, knight d4, and pawn c3, and the knight was just trapped. We had something like that. It was very funny. But yeah, knight d4. And here we have a bit of a choice. So we can go pawn to c3, hitting the knight. And after knight e6, I think there's some interesting lines after like knight to f3, knight f6. How does it go? I think it's queen c2 or bishop d3 or something like that. But I'm pretty sure c3 is the way that we want to begin this. And the long-term plan in this position is to play pawn d4. And in many ways, this does resemble the Alpine Sicilian, which I'm more and more being tempted to play. Yeah, let me think. Basically, there's two moves here that are nice. There's bishop c4, and there is knight to f3. And I mean, the ideal setup is knight f3, bishop c4, pawn d3, castle. That's the ideal setup. The issue is, if we go knight to f3, you know, if black goes d6 and bishop c4, knight f6, pawn d3, castles, perfect. Great, no issue. But black doesn't have to cooperate. If we go bishop c4, or, well, okay, let's say we go knight f3, maybe d5 is quite annoying. And I think that's probably the best move. So I'm more inclined to play bishop c4, which also prevents d5. We can also go queen b3 to increase control over the d5 square and apply pressure to f7, making it difficult for this knight to move. And I personally think this position is very interesting. And I think white has a clear practical advantage. The engine may say this is quite equal. It probably gives a slight advantage to white. But I think practically this is very nice for white. And okay, knight to f6. And knight f6 is a strong move because he's attacking e4, but he's also supporting a pawn to d5 push. So how do we deal with that? Well, if pawn d3, which again is the move that we want to play, then after pawn d5, knight d5, queen b3, knight f4, bishop f4, pawn f4, because if knight f4, then bishop f7. I think that's quite interesting. We could consider something like knight to f3. I would like to play a move like queen e2, with the idea of if d5 take, then e5 hangs. But if queen e2, then there seems to just be this knight to f4 move, because our bishop doesn't control this square yet. So that doesn't seem to work. Alternatively, we could go knight to f3, counter-attacking. If pawn d5 take, that's great. We're up a pawn, I think. I mean, we're up a pawn, but I think we keep the pawn. But if knight f3, knight e4, knight e5, pawn d5, I'm not convinced by that position at all. So, okay. Okay. Pawn d3, pawn d5. Maybe that's just the way that we have to do this. I think. Queen c2 doesn't really make sense. So let's go pawn d3. Yeah, this was the critical line of this way of approaching the game for black, which I need to book up a bit more on. It does take a little bit of the fun out of the gambit portion of the opening, but it's still good for white. Okay, b6 I'm not too concerned about. To be honest, that just seems to make a7 a permanent weakness. So I'm more than happy for my opponent to do that. Of course, he wants to go bishop b7, play for a move like d5. Totally understandable. But I think we can start with knight to f3, just hitting the e5 pawn, forcing black to do something about it. If a move like d6, it's playable, but it does block this bishop. We're also supporting d4 in the future. Queen c7 looks far more natural, applying pressure to the bishop and defending. I like the look of the move queen b3, adding more defense to the d5 square, and also making it hard for this knight to move because of the f7 pawn. And just defending the bishop so that d4 is playable in the future. So I think this makes a lot of sense. I do need to be aware of knight c5 ideas, though, hitting the queen. I do need to be aware of that. I don't think it's an issue for the time being, but it could be. Could be in the future. Okay. We could even consider going for knight g5 sort of moves to try to overload the light square diagonal. That looks quite interesting. Which, yeah, my opponent responds with h6 to prevent that, I assume, which makes a lot of sense. Okay, good play from my opponent. Let's see. Taking doesn't really seem to be logical. I mean, why would we trade off our light square bishop? If f takes, I suppose there's holes on the king side, and we can maybe go for like knight to h4, knight g6. But if taken pawn takes, as in the d pawn takes, then I'm not really sure why we bothered taking. So the most natural move is just to go ahead and castle. Do we need to be concerned about knight c5? I don't think so. I think queen a2 looks fine. f7 is hanging. We could even maybe take and then play queen a2. Although maybe d3 hangs. Or actually we could play taking queen c4, preparing bishop to d5, which looks nicer. So yeah, okay, that looks fine. Let's castle. And yeah, I think we do want to play for d4, but we need to make sure we have it nicely prepared first. Okay, bishop b7. Makes sense, just applying pressure to e4 and discouraging us from going d4, and also maybe preparing d5 in the future. This bishop needs to find a square to develop to. So, you know, a silly move right now would be bishop a3, allowing black to trade off his problem piece and then castle. I, of course, don't want to give him that option. Does d4 make sense? Take... If d4 and my opponent like takes on e4, then we can take on e5, and I think that looks quite nice. I think. But I'm also thinking if d4 and he takes on d4 and we take back, and then he takes on e4, then I'm not so sure. Not so sure. Knight bd2 looks reasonable, just guarding e4. Maybe rook e1 and d4 is a nice idea. Although we could start with rook e1. I think the rook wants to go to e1 regardless. And maybe we can create some central breakthrough at some point. It's an interesting position. I think it's quite a rich position. We have a very clear plan of pawn d4. It's very obvious that's our intention. And we just need to secure the e4 square first, and then we can try and make that a reality. Bishop d6, okay. That's going to create potential forking ideas on e5. I thought the bishop was better placed on e7, personally. But yeah, this is going to be a very nice fork if we can achieve it. And of course, we do have enough support on that square. And if we take on d6, it will always come with tempo on the queen. So there's no time for moves like bishop f3. So knight bd2 seems to simply threaten this move. Although, if pawn d4 and take, then we just have pawn e5, which is crushing. If pawn d4, knight e4, I suppose that's what we need to consider, really. And here, then black is good, and he actually has really nice counterplay. So I guess that's the concern, is that I don't want to allow pawn e4, right? So that should mean that knight bd2 is a good move. The knight can always come over to g3 and into f5, which could be a very nice attacking square. I'm not convinced by castles. I thought he might move the queen. I thought that might be the idea, but pawn d4, how does black defend? I mean, I suppose if we take, he just takes back and all is fine. But bishop b2, and I mean, we're just turning the dial. Maybe we give away the f4 square. I don't think it's that big a deal. d4 looks really strong. If d4, rook fc8, take. Maybe that's what my opponent's going for? Maybe? Although this is defended, though. Pawn d4, rook fc8 doesn't actually threaten anything. I can just go bishop b2, I think. If he ever tries some weird tactics to distract my knight, I can always take on e6 first. I think we should go for it. d4 also takes away the c5 square from the e6 knight. Now, as I said, if take, e5 is going to be crushing, and you don't have time for bishop f3. Firstly, because we just have knight f3, renewing the threat, but also because pawn takes on d6 comes with tempo on the queen, so you'd have to take back, and then we take back the bishop, and then we're up a piece. So this can't be taken. e4 is also defended, so e4 can't be taken. And this just looks like a very nice position. Now, we don't want to necessarily close the center up with a move like pawn d5, because ideas like knight c5 could be very, very annoying. We can never kick that knight away from c5, because both of our b and d pawns are advanced beyond control of the c5 square. So c5 would be an amazing outpost for the black knight. So we need to be careful with how we're going to execute this. But I think we can just play for sustained positional pressure in the center, on the A file, along this diagonal. By the way, if you're enjoying the video so far, please drop a like and subscribe if you haven't already. I'd really appreciate it. And also let me know when the road to 2200 rapid is completed, which it might be in this episode, who knows. Please let me know what you would like to see next. I will also be starting to play some over-the-board classical games as the new season begins. So I will be doing some analysis of those, but those will be once a week at most. So what do you want to see? Do you want to see opening guides? Do you want to see another speed run? Let me know. But okay, back to the game. I think moves like pawn h3 or pawn g3 make a lot of sense in the future, just controlling the king side. We do have to be aware that potentially black could start some attacking ideas if he's able to take on d4, for example, and open up his forces to the king side. For the time being, of course, he can't take because we just win material with pawn e5. But it is something to be aware of. Perhaps we can... Wait, maybe we have threats of bishop e6. Do we have threats of bishop e6? And after pawn takes, knight c4? Whoa, knight h7. What an ugly move. I mean, you can see the idea. f6 maybe, or f5. Well, no, actually, because then the knight is a problem. I suppose if I take, he can take and open up the f-file, but it's more so just so that this doesn't come with a fork, right? That's the idea. So maybe he wants to take here, but I'm not sure that's a great shout. Okay, interesting. Very interesting. Now, I'm not sure trading makes a whole lot of sense. Knight f3. Queen back. Bishop a3. Rook e8. I mean, we could win the bishop pair. Rook d1. I don't know, that does actually make a lot of sense. It does make a lot of sense. Well, maybe knight takes to force him to take. Because if pawn takes, he could try and sidestep and claim my pawns are weak. So knight takes, bishop takes, pawn takes, queen takes. Bishop a3, rook e8. Knight f3. Queen c7, rook d1. I think we have interesting ideas there. And the knight is just misplaced completely. Maybe you can come into g5. We can also go bishop d5 in some lines. I suppose our c3 pawn is a concern. But the c3 pawn is a concern no matter what. Because it's a target right now anyway. So this is a very interesting option. Going for the trades in the center. And claiming I have a strong bishop pair. And also I have good pressure on a7 and on d7, which are both backwards pawns. So c3 might be weak, but I have one weakness and my opponent has two weaknesses. I think I should go for it. It makes a lot of sense to me. Let's do it. Queen takes. I don't think knight f3 and bishop a3, I don't think the order is that important. I suppose knight f3 sets potential traps of if queen c5 we can skewer. So it's more innocuous maybe. But yeah, I'm liking this. I mean, if bishop to d5, if my opponent doesn't take, then we can maybe go c4. By taking, I am giving him the c5 square for the knight, which is true. Didn't fully think that through, but I don't think it's that big a deal. Okay, queen c7. Makes sense. I mean, bishop a3 just looks correct. It's just developing with tempo, and you can see my bishops are super, super strong. Also, when the rook moves, now f7 is weak. Okay. Bishop's under attack. And if I move the bishop, c3 is under attack. I could take. But after pawn takes, bishop b4. I'm not convinced. We're just helping the black structure. If bishop d5, of course, you can't take on c3 because I'll take and then take. So bishop d5, bishop d5. Queen d5? Maybe? Knight f6, though, is annoying. Bishop d5, ed5, hitting the knight. Knight c5. Bishop takes, queen takes. Rook e7 looks very strong. Okay, that's interesting then. And if he doesn't take the bishop, I can go pawn c4, perhaps. And if then bishop takes, then I have the option of c takes. Maybe. Okay. My other consideration is knight back to d2, just guarding the bishop. But it feels passive. So I think we should be trying to move forwards. As I said, I don't think queen takes makes any sense because we just take and then take, and we're up a piece. So yeah, here. If take, I of course play take, take, and take, and I'm up a piece. Let's take. Knight c5 expected. I suppose I did slightly miss the fact that if bishop takes, queen takes, I can't go rook e7. Not least because my queen doesn't actually see f7, but because he also defends that square if the queen lands on c5. So, slight oversight, but I don't think it's that big a deal. I think this is just a favourable endgame. Now, whether I can keep hold of all my material, I don't know. You still can't take because of this, so the knight has to move. Maybe my opponent is considering knight to f4. Or knight g5, really? Really? Okay. That's interesting. So, c3 is under attack. My knight is also under attack, and I can't allow take-take, right? So either I have to take this, and this comes with check, by the way, if he takes. So either I have to take his knight, or I have to move my knight, or I have to defend my knight. Rook e3 actually looks quite strong. If rook e3, knight e3, knight e3, knight g5, rook e3, that looks quite nice. Preparing to double up. Ooh, okay. That's a good option. So rook e3 is my first consideration. Second, I don't think knight e5 makes any sense because f7 is defended. And I need to move my d-pawn anyway. Knight d4 makes no sense, I don't think. Queen c3, rook c3. I don't have any threats. So I think rook e3. Taking, I don't want to let his knight into the game. Although he doesn't have anywhere to go, does it? Doesn't actually have any moves. I mean, even bishop e7 looks interesting. Just hitting... Oh, no, the knight's defended. Okay, no, why would I bother? Although I could play take and pawn h4. And the knight would have to retreat to h7. Although it would just come back in via f6. There's a lot of possibilities here. But I think rook e3 is my favorite. I think rook e3 is my favorite. It just feels like the most solid move. Okay. So you may be tempted of ideas like pawn d6, hitting the queen and hitting f7, but there is always queen c4 in those lines, blocking the attack. And he goes for queen c4 immediately. So all the pawns are under attack. And my queen is obviously under attack. If I move my queen, I'm going to be giving up one of the pawns. Well, one of these two. If take and take, rook e1, knight g5, rook e3. The bishop can always go to b4 to defend c3. I think that's okay. I think that's okay. Black doesn't actually seem to have any threats. Maybe knight to f6 is frustrating, because maybe d5 is hard to defend. Bishop e4 immediately is interesting, preemptively guarding and applying pressure. If here and here, maybe I can push. It's actually really hard for black to attack any of my pawns. Although he does have knight d5, hitting the bishop, and I don't really want to give up the bishop. Also, I have back rank issues. So, okay. Bishop e7 is kind of a funny move, stopping the knight from coming to f6. Bishop e7, rook e8, pawn d6. a7 is weak. Rook c5. Rook a7, rook b5, threatening mate. Pawn h4. Maybe I should have gone pawn h4 already to create luft with tempo. Maybe that was better. Okay, what about rook e1? Rook e1, knight f6. Rook e7. Knight e5. Rook d7. Knight c3. Rook here. Mate is guarded by the bishop. This is tough. I'm going to go rook e1. I don't think it makes sense to put this rook on e1 because we already have pressure on f7. If knight g5, it does defend f7, and we don't have h4 because the rook controls h4. If knight g5, rook e3, the knight has no moves. I could prepare this as well, kick the knight back to h7. But I can also just infiltrate regardless because there's more things to look at anyway. Okay. Maybe rook c8 is the issue. Rook e7, rook c8. I don't have bishop b4. I'm really not happy about playing rook d1. Not happy. I've just wasted my time, haven't I? Yeah, that was silly. That was a panicky move. That was a very panicky move. You can also go for that now. Yeah, I'm just too low on time. Okay, let's go king f1 to stop this rook infiltrating. I can't go rook e3 because I'm going to be giving up the c-pawn. This is poor time management. Poor time management. From what was a clearly better position, or at least practically better position, even if the engine were to have found a way out. Okay, let's defend. It's just starting to feel a bit passive. I also can't really go d6 because of this. I mean, the bright side is that a7 is going to be weak, and I could throw the rook over there at an appropriate moment. So that's nice, but when am I going to have the opportunity? Maybe I can do this. That's actually quite interesting. Bishop d6, bishop to b8. I do have to be very careful my bishop doesn't get trapped, though, because that could very easily happen. It's an option. It's an option. d6, I don't like it because it just... my bishop has no scope then. Can't do anything because the d6 pawn is in the way. Also relinquishes control of light squares like e6, which I don't really want to do. For example, if the knight comes to e6, maybe it can come to c5. So I don't really want to let it do that. Yeah, 20 seconds left. That's not ideal for sure. Not ideal. But we will keep fighting. We will keep fighting. We're not lost. We just have to be passive for the time being, which is fine. We can recover. If knight to e4, attacking, c3. I guess bishop b4. If knight c5. I probably don't want to take it. I don't think. I would assume I want to move my rook. Because if I do take it, then the rook gets there. And then I'm in serious trouble. Unless I can execute c4 to guard the pawns. But I can't. Not yet. Okay. There's also not really any back rank opportunities against the Black King. That's a pipe dream. H7 is always a way out, and I have a dark squared bishop, and H7 is a light square, so that's never going to come to anything. The issue is just 20 seconds is not enough. Not enough. I've definitely messed the endgame up a bit. I do think trading the queens on c4 was correct, but maybe rook e1 was wrong. Maybe I should have gone bishop b4 instead to stop the a-rook from moving. Or even just giving my king some space with a move like king f1 or pawn h3 or pawn f3. Maybe that was better. I don't know. But this is the position we've got. Let's see if we can make it work. Endgames are where most chess games are won and lost anyway. Well, okay, no, not most. But a lot, obviously. Alright. Alright. My opponent is really taking his time. I'm a bit unsure why. I mean, I think maybe he's considering if knight e4 does anything. I think knight e4 makes sense. Does allow me to go bishop to b4 and potentially try and go rook to a1 because it would relieve some pressure on d5 because the knight is currently targeting d5, so maybe that's what he's thinking about. What else can black do? I mean, moving the king doesn't really do anything. It's going to give me time to consolidate. Or even go for this idea, which might not actually come to anything, but it's an annoying concept for black. I could even play a move like f3 to restrict the movement of this knight and give my king some breathing room. Another option. Maybe trying to come into f4 is interesting. But I guess if knight h5, I can just go pawn g3, and then, I mean, the knight has no moves. I suppose f5, f4 is an interesting idea, but again, I do have bishop, maybe bishop d6? Maybe? Okay. Let's go bishop d6. I'm just asking the question. Where does he want to put the rook? Also, I get 10 seconds every move, so obviously I want my 10 seconds. Knight e4 will come with tempo on the bishop if my bishop remains on d6. So that's worth noting. If rook f5, then f3 won't stop knight to e4 because the pawn is pinned to the king. Also worth noting. Okay, I'm going to go f3 to stop the movement of the knight. I assume he's trying to stop bishop b8, but to be honest, I don't think I was going to play it anyway. Okay, let's go king f2. I'm not really concerned about this push. Let's go rook a1, targeting the a7 pawn. I feel like he's given me a bit of relief here, which is surprising. Rook a8, that's quite passive, and I'll happily see my opponent do that. Maybe I want to put the king in the center? I don't know. It's a more active approach. I like that. No, I don't want to give him the c5 square, though. Bishop b4 makes more sense. Because again, if my opponent gets a rook on c5, then b5 could fall. And if b5 falls, he has a passed a pawn. The reason this pawn structure is so beneficial to me is because my one pawn is controlling both black pawns. So this pawn can never move. Okay, d6 should be a serious consideration now. And I think I'm going to play it. Because I control d5. The knight can't come here, and this rook sucks. Okay. This is looking interesting. King up? That rook sucks. I might even look for a rook trade. Because this rook is paralyzed. And as long as I don't allow the knight into the game via the d5 square, we should be good. Okay. This is shaping up nicely. I don't want to move my a-rook yet, because for the time being, it's paralyzing his rook on b7, which has no good way back into the game. The a-pawn can never move because I'll take en passant, or just pawn a6. Although, if you were to play pawn a6, which is obviously a terrible move, I might just go rook a6. Okay. He's trying to push, but I don't think it does anything. I'm just going to look for the trade. I think it benefits me. Because this c4 rook is his active rook, right? He puts the rook back on c8. I think rook c8 was a better option, in my opinion. But I'm trying to constrict this knight. I'm trying not to let it into the game. I think h4 is an interesting move, trying to bring the knight in like this, because my bishop is kind of out of the game for now. It's trapped behind its own pawns, although I could go c4 and bring it back in some other way. The black pawns are defended. They are all defended, but this pawn on d6 and the pawn on b5 are very, very active. Okay, that's interesting. I'm going to go rook to e1, looking for this. If the pawn moves, I take en passant, and if he blocks, I just come back, and I'm perfectly fine with that. I have potential infiltrations on e7, because f7 is now undefended. I've got to be careful. I've got to be careful, actually. Is rook e7 actually a good move? I'm going to go rook back to a1. Okay, I need to consider this carefully. I think pawn c4 might be better. If the king comes to e6, then I can give the check and force the king out. If the king comes to f4, I can bring my bishop back with check, maybe. And then perhaps rook e1 is better, because I'm actually threatening to win the e5 pawn, right? Okay, so the king retreats. I guess we squeeze. Don't know. Yeah, of course, taking would be a terrible move. Terrible move, because it allows knight takes. I could push. I think pushing makes sense. Trying to apply more pressure. If pawn g3 is an interesting idea, to sack a pawn and play knight to g4. I don't think it has enough compensation, to be honest, but it's interesting. Pawn g3, I can give this check first. If king back, check here. Win the knight, maybe? Whoa. Okay, so if I push, he gets the g5 square. Okay. Oh, he's going to go knight f8, knight e6. I think. Okay. Let's go g3 for now. Just securing this. Stopping pawn h4 ideas. I think I can take... do I? No, I think g4 is just weak. This is so weird. I'm squeezing the black position, but he's got so many things on light squares. It's actually hard to like do anything. Okay, I wasn't too concerned about that. That just looks like a target. Knight f8. I don't have pawn f5 anymore if the knight comes to e6. Wait, if knight f8, rook e1, knight here, I can just sack the rook. I can sack the exchange because the d6 pawn is too powerful. That is awesome. Okay, well that changes everything. Yeah, that changes everything. I just go rook e1. I mean, his b7 rook can now move, but I'm not that fast. It has no way into the game because I've secured the C file and the E file, it's all secure. Let's go 97. Sorry, rook e7. Again, if 96, I'll just take it, I think. Rook check. King d7. Rook e4. I suppose c4 is actually quite weak. So if here, I probably just come back to d5. King comes over. On d7. Okay. Rook d8. c5 looks like the right move to me. It just looks correct. Although king e4 looks interesting. No, it's got to be c5. It's got to be c5. Just trying to break through. Has to be. f5. King e4 playing for f5 is interesting. We are setting up potential mates. But I think my opponent can just go f5 and we're kind of wasting our time. Because, I mean, even if we go bishop c3 and rook g7 check, the king has h8. Sorry, h6. And we have no follow-up. We have no follow-up there. So, yeah, it doesn't really accomplish much. Rook b8, king c4, maybe? But if king c4, knight e6, well, then I can take. a7 is obviously threatened. d7 is pressured. I'm just trying to turn the dial up. And what's great is this king is basically out of the game. I mean, it has f5, but can't do anything from there. It's just being monitored by this rook very nicely. Okay, how do I continue? Like this? What if here a6, b6? That looks quite nice. Maybe he's going for this. Oh my god, I'm running out of time. I almost flagged. Oh my god. Oh my god. That was terrifying. I almost flagged. a6, b6. Yeah, that's nice. That's nice. Ooh, I just gave myself a bit of a heart attack there. That was unnecessary. Okay. I think... Wait, am I giving up d6? I'm playing some silly moves. I'm not really sure. I'm not sure. I'm concerned about this. But then... This? My idea is, if this... I can actually consider taking, although there is... No, but the rook is... So if knight here, pawn here, rook b8, king a7, rook e8, bishop c5, and then my b pawn runs. That's my idea. Okay. Well, I guess bishop a7 has to be the move. I was half expecting bishop b5, sorry, rook b5 ideas, but I'm not sure. I don't know whether king a6 was ingenious or silly. I don't know. Okay. don't know if this is silly or not. Okay, he's going for counterplay. I like it. It's good for my opponent. Okay, I think I want to do something like this and then just push. Knight g3, and these pawns are rolling. It's creating counterplay. For sure. Knight e4, pawn b7. Rook over. Bishop b6. Of course, I'm trying to block the b file so I can promote. If check here, check. Gotta be careful I don't get myself mated. Because that would be mate. I could actually get myself mated here. I think it's okay, though. I suppose I would love to go to e2, but I just can't. Check. Whoa. Okay, I didn't expect that. That seems silly to me. Because he's never going to make up the time. I also control g1. Okay. Well, sorry, I have a bit of time to think now. Okay, I have time to think. Okay, queen e8 check. King f5 force to defend the knight. Oh, that's it. Yeah, that's good enough for me. That's good enough for me. Okay, I know I'm up a queen, but this pawn is about to promote, and there may be some, like, sacrifices where he promotes with check, so I've got to be careful. So, I don't want to do anything silly. Is there anything better? I mean, queen h5 is the only check. I have no other checks in the position, so I probably should play this. Again, got to be careful of rook b6, king b6, and pawn g1 promote. This check. I can't seem to line things up with the rook. I also have the d pawn that I could push as well. I am aware. Yeah, this is like not the easiest conversion. I think if... Okay. I'm trying to get my bishop or rook involved. Give a check. King here, I think I want to play this. Bringing the bishop in. And if I force the king onto the e file, then I can bring the rook in. And that would just be mate. If the... Where else can the king go? Well, he can block with a knight. Yeah, he does. I could take and just go rook to g7 check. That's an option. As in queen takes on g3. I expect rook c2. Renewing the threat. Oh, my bishop. Yep. Okay, I think this is the easiest. I don't know if I'm being silly here, but it looks good to me. I think I've got enough. Yeah, I think this is enough. Because if rook d2, bishop d6, blocking his rook, he can't promote. King f4 does surprise me, I have to say. I can also take this, although that's maybe dangerous. Let's just give this check. Oh, it also comes with check. Oh, that's brilliant then. That's completely game over. Yeah, I thought king to f2 would be the... Oh, he doesn't have king f2. Duh. because my bishop controls that square. Maybe this would have made more sense. Don't know. But yeah, king moves. I can now promote a second time. And now the pressure will be too much, I think. Let's go queen h4, looking at all kinds of different checks. And that should be it. That was a very, very tense game. I don't know how we've clawed that endgame back, because I was better, and then I was worse, and then I had no time. Okay, that doesn't do anything. There's no stalemate. Check, pick this pawn up. Game over. Yeah, my opponent resigns, and we get 2200. Wow. That was a long game. That was a tense game. I nearly ran out of time like 3 times. Wow. GG. Let's jump into the analysis. Okay, the game review actually surprises me a bit because, okay, 85.4% accuracy for us, 80.2 for my opponent. That sounds about right. I think there was only one time in which we gave away the advantage. Like, significantly. Let's jump into it, though. So, we have the A3 Sicilian. B4, my opponent doesn't take twice, which would lead to these very fun positions. And if you want to see more of those, then check out my A3 Sicilian playlist down below. But my opponent goes E5. We go pawn B5, the best move, kicking the knight to D4. C3, kicking the knight to E6. Bishop C4. Okay, so the engine prefers knight F3. And I mean, if D6, then brilliant. I mean, bishop C4, knight F6, pawn D3. Perfect. If D5, just ED5, knight D5, we can take here, we can castle, all is good. Bishop C4, my opponent goes knight F6, we go pawn D3. And I half expected to move D5 here. I thought queen B3 was interesting. Engine thinks knight F3 is better first. Okay. How does black defend? If F6, then I mean that's insanely weak. And I suppose that's the point. It's so hard to defend because you don't have this because the knight hangs and the queen can't defend because the knight hangs. If you go queen D6, bishop A3 is going to be an issue. My opponent goes pawn B6, which is a mistake. Knight F3, queen C7, queen B3. Engine wants bishop D5. And if bishop B7, queen B7. Oh. Oh. Right. Okay. And if knight takes, E takes. If knight C5, D4, ED4. Ooh, it wants to castle. Okay. Really? Bishop E7, CD4, knight E4, rook E1, pawn F5, D6, take, queen B3. That is very interesting, but I'm not sure I'd find that. I mean, queen B3, pawn H6, which I thought was logical because knight G5 ideas could be annoying. So, like, I don't know, bishop E7, maybe knight G5 is an idea because if, like, take, then, you know, that's very scary. But okay, pawn H6. Castles, which is good. Bishop B7. Just developing the bishop. Knight BD2 and rook E1 are the same, really. Bishop D6 is actually the best square for the bishop. I thought it was going to go to E7. And something like this, and D4. But no, D6 is the best square. Knight BD2, castle. D4 is the best continuation. And it's almost +1. My opponent goes knight H7. Which is inaccurate, and it felt wrong, and I felt like I had to do something. The engine wants me to take on E6. Now, I rejected this idea because it just felt strange to be giving away the bishop pair, and I know knight C4 exists, but I also thought, well, if this, I don't know, this doesn't look that impressive. I missed this skewer in this position, though. So knight E5 is a mistake, but we're still better. Okay, knight F3 is wrong. Engine wants bishop F1. There's no way I'm seeing bishop F1. Knight C5. Queen B4. Rook E8. Knight C4. Queen C7. Pawn E5. Okay, that's very interesting, but I don't think I'd see that. I win knight f3. And I thought I had some nice pressure. Rook fc8, bishop d5 is the best move. Bishop d5, ed5. And then that felt very wrong. I thought knight c5 had to be played. And then after I moved the queen somewhere, like c2, let's say, knight f6, c4, and I think we have an interesting game. This felt completely wrong. Rook e3 is the mistake, though. The best is taking, and if knight takes, h4, knight back. I saw this. d6. And if take... Oh, wow, okay. And if knight f8... Oh my god, I completely missed that. That's awesome, those tactics. Wow, okay, I completely missed that. And so if d6, the queen has to do something else. And then I just have insane pressure. And this is clearly much better. Yeah. Huh. Rook e3 is the mistake. So take queen c4. Taking is correct. But rook e1 is not. I need to either go bishop e7, which I considered, or bishop e4, which I considered. After bishop e4, knight f6, I need to find rook d3. And after rook e8, I can't take as a back rank mate. Pawn g3. Rook e5, counter-attacking. Rook a7, knight d5, bishop's threatened, bishop d6. And it's equal. Although, I think we have interesting chances. Although, I don't know. There's not much. Rook e1, though. Knight f6. Rook d1, a panic move. I literally played that move with 0.7 seconds on the clock, because obviously I gained 10 seconds each move. And g1's rook d3. In hindsight, that is clearly the better move. I thought d6 was silly, which it is, because firstly, you can try and break out, but secondly, it's restricting my own bishop. So rook d1. Here, the best move is a6. My opponent goes rook e8, which is also good. King f1. g3 was better. Rook e5, hitting the pawn. Rook fd3, the only move to defend. And here I thought, okay, I'm certainly not better, but I'm okay. I can survive this. And my opponent spent a long time playing king h7. Bishop d6, asking the question. Now, the thing is, I actually thought that this was a bad idea. I don't think I was actually going to go for it, because it gives the c5 square. That's the issue. So even if I win this, he's going to win this and defend b6. No, c4 is interesting in fairness. I didn't think that far ahead, but he went rook e8, which I was pleased to see. And after f3, g5, king f2, king g6, rook a1, the game is equal. Rook e to c8, a very good move. Trying to stay active, so I defend with the bishop. And then rook c7 is a mistake. Okay, the only move for black not to be worse is rook e8. And if I take, then rook e5, and I have no way of guarding. And if I push, then I give this up, which is interesting. But rook c7 is the natural move. We go pawn d6, kicking the rook to this terrible b7 square. And king e3, rook d4 is the best continuation, because I figured this rook is so active, I need to get rid of it. Now here, the best move is rook c8, which I kind of thought would be the case. And after king d3, if rook e8, then c4, the engine thinks I'm much better. If rook e5, h4, h4, really? And if rook e6, yeah, it doesn't do anything. Okay. I guess we just have the positional bind on black. The knight can't really do much. But we get the trade. King f5, rook e1. I think rook b8 was a good decision. I went back, and I thought he was going to go rook e8, which is the best move. And I was unsure about this position, but I felt like I had to commit to it. We can still play for a win after rook b7, rook g2, rook b6, rook h2, rook a6. We can still try, and I think we have very good chances. But rook b7 is what we love to see, because it lets me reset and figure out how I'm going to break through. So pawn c4, king g6, king e5, taking space. Pawn g4 is a mistake because of pawn f4, which I, of course, play. Taking would be terrible. Knight g4 and, I mean, black is okay. He's up a pawn. He's still worse, but he's okay. So we push. Knight h7. g3 is the mistake. So f5 check is the best move. I thought that gave away the g5 square. But I think the point is, if the knight gets here, it still can't go anywhere. Which I failed to consider. So king g7, bishop c3. King h6. King f4. Let's see, knight f8. Yeah, black just can't move. This is really, really cool. I went g3, though. I'm still better, though. So f6 check, king d5 is the only move that maintains a big advantage. Knight f8, rook e1, and here I've realized knight e6 can't be played because I simply sack the exchange and game over. So my opponent also realized that and went rook b8. Rook e7 is a mistake. Bishop c3 is better. Why? Again, if knight e6 I sack, yeah, sacking is good. Let's say rook a8. Bishop d4. Oh, the engine just wants my bishop to target the pawns. So if this, I can just take. On rook e7, rook d8. The best move is a6, which I have to take rook a8, bishop c3, rook a6, pawn f5, king takes, rook f7. That's really cool. But rook d8, pawn c5. I couldn't quite figure out what to do, but I was so low on time. This is a good plan, though. King c4 is the only move. Everything else is equal. I was also trying to figure out whether I could go for king e4, where the point would be, let's say black does nothing, then f5, king g5, and bishop d2 is mate. My problem was that black could just push, and I thought that I was not doing anything. I suppose it couldn't have hurt to try, because, I mean, black still can't move. I think, yeah, because king f6, I just give a check, so it doesn't matter. I should have tried it, but okay, c5, take, rook b8, king c4, rook b7. King b4 is inaccurate. Knight e6. Bishop e3 is the best move. Knight g7, trying to come over here. King a5, knight f5. And here, okay, king a6 is the blunder. And my opponent just needs to take. And that's what I thought he was going to do. Trade the pawns. The engine finds this. Oh, wow, that's really cool. Okay, that is a very nice tactic. My opponent went rook b8. The point was, if you take my rook, one, I can take his rook, but I was actually just going to take. And after rook b8, king a7, rook e8, bishop c5, king f7, pawn b6, king e6, pawn push, d6. This is just completely winning. This is what I calculated. So rook b8, bishop a7, and now the game is basically over. My opponent did do very well creating counterplay, going after my pawns on the king side, but it's just not enough. Rook b2, bishop b6. I thought he was going to give this check, and I was saying I could very easily get myself mated. No, sorry, what was it? It was knight c3, and if here I can get myself mated, which would have been hilarious. But I did see it, fortunately. But I was actually struggling to figure out how I actually get out of the box. The engine finds king d4, which I think I probably would have found had it happened. But pawn g3, I promote. Pawn g2. And here, it's actually harder than it looks. Queen e8, king f5, queen h5, king f4. I'm giving the correct checks here. Bishop c5, rook c2. And I have to be careful, because if I play something like rook g7, he can promote with check. Now, I am still winning, but I don't want this kind of thing. I don't want to have to deal with this. Point is, there's no checks. So after black defends, I can actually just do this, and I win the pawn and I promote. But I thought giving up the queen made a lot of sense, because of rook g7, only move, king f4, and pawn d7. I thought it would be interesting if the black king had gone to h2. And then after I push, something like take. Oh no, sorry, that doesn't work. What was? No, there's no way out of this. I think I just thought there was some interesting way black could get a queen versus rook endgame, but I don't think there is. King f4, d7, just block and promote, and then the game is as good as over from there, and my opponent resigns. So, yeah, 2200 achieved in a very difficult game. I hope that was really instructive, particularly in the end game. But chess is tough, especially at this level. Chess is very tough. If you made it all the way to the end of this video, thank you so much. Please let me know what you want to see next down in the comment section below. Thank you so much for watching. I'm going to show a video over here in an A3 Sicilian game if you want to learn more. And if you want to watch the whole climb to 2200, check out the playlist down there. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in one of those videos.